Hello, and welcome to our Zoom webinar, Finding the Right Trial, a Guide to Clinical Trial Tools. My name is Marissa, and I'm the Engagement Coordinator at Global Liver Institute. This webinar is part of our Tackling Liver Cancer Disparities series held in collaboration with the Health Council of South Florida and the Southeast Florida Cancer Control Collaborative. The Health Council of South Florida is a trusted regional organization dedicated to improving the health and wellness in Miami-Dade and Monroe counties. For over 50 years, HCSF has provided unbiased health data, strategic planning, and community services while fostering collaboration and advocating for equitable healthcare policies. The Southeast Florida Cancer Control Collaborative is a voluntary network of healthcare providers, community organizations, and advocates working together to reduce the burden of cancer across Southeast Florida. Today, we are very excited to have Dr. Tran, a medical oncologist specializing in the treatment of hepatobiliary cancers. This session will break down the fundamentals of clinical trials and teach you how to navigate key clinical trial tools to help you find a trial that's right for you. We are so honored to have Dr. Tran here with us today to discuss this important topic. And with that, I will pass it over to you to start the presentation.
Thank you. Welcome everyone for joining me today on the webinar, Finding the Right Trial, a Guide to Clinical Trial Tools. I hope that we can just briefly talk about what is a clinical trial, and then move on to some of the risk and the benefits and the potential questions that are being asked in a clinical trial and how you can find a clinical trial. And then of course go through a few examples on where you could potentially look for ones that may fit your needs. So with that, I'm going to go to the next slide here. So this is a question that I like to ask the audience, and if you want to put down your comments, send us questions later. What has been your experience with clinical trials, whether you've never had any experience or you had difficulty finding one and don't know where to look. A family member may have participated in one, or you yourself may have been participated in one. And maybe your thoughts are that clinical trials are less options. So hopefully we can try to answer some of these questions as we go through the presentation. So what is a clinical trial? In its most basic term, this is a research study, and it involves people with cancer or essentially any other health topic of interest, any other health problems. And it helps physicians and investigators find maybe better ways to prevent or detect or treat a specific condition. In our particular case, liver cancer, for example. And trials may test new drugs, they may test combination of drugs, or they may test a new diagnostic test or imaging, or ways to use the treatments differently than standard of care. And why are cancer clinical trials important? Well, many of the standard of care treatments that we have today basically came from clinical trials. We had to test it first. We had to know that it was safe to give. And then, of course, it received FDA approval in order for it to become standard of care treatments. Now, trials do test new drugs, which, again, typically have to show some sort of benefit for the patients, right? Whether the patient's being tested or a future patient. So it either has to improve survival, it may reduce side effects, or enhance quality of life in some ways. And so that's sort of the purpose of a clinical trial. And of course, it offers hope and progress for a lot of our patients, whether in the current trial, participating in it, or future patients. So what do cancer clinical trials test? So one of the first questions that is asked in a clinical trial is how safe is a new cancer treatment for the patients. And so typically we would assess for side effects within that. And then of course, how well does it work against treating a specific cancer or a condition? And so with that in mind, we looked at how well is the response, is there tumor shrinkage, is there better quality of life, does patient live longer, etc. And then, of course, again, what are the side effects that the current treatment is potentially associated with? Okay. So who can join a cancer clinical trial? Really, any patients interested in a clinical trial and a specific cancer stage diagnosis, there is really open to anybody who meets the eligibility. Now, patients who may have been treated or have not been treated could join a clinical trial. Essentially, it boils down to if the patient has the right criteria that is listed in that protocol, then their ability to be able to enroll to that trial. Now, it, it is a sticking point for a lot of folks because sometimes eligibility criteria can be very strict and therefore eliminate a lot of our patients. But having said that, it is meant to ensure the safety of the patients enrolled, making sure that they can tolerate the treatment and that they could potentially benefit from the treatment. So what are the phases of clinical trials? So I'm very general information here. So phase one essentially is trying to find a safe dose and monitoring for the side effects. This is, again, one of the earliest, you could call it first in human kind of study. The sample size here is small. You're talking about less than 50 patients potentially, where they're looking at side effects. Okay. The next one, phase two, is slightly larger. And this is, again, looking at safety. And then the early signal of how well does the treatment works. And so this is where you have sample size that are ranging from 20 to 100 patients. And typically, we're broadening it out to a lot more patients. And then phase three is typically the largest clinical trial where you could have potentially up to more than 1,000 patients, depending on how the statistical plan is done. But essentially, it's comparing a new treatment to standard of care or potentially to even a placebo, which isn't as ideal, right? But this is one of the largest studies, and typically in a phase three, you already have the signal, safety signal, as well as the efficacy signal, and you're trying to broaden it out to a lot more patients to confirm that finding. Phase four is typically not a trial. It's more of a long-term monitoring that is done by registries or by the FDA to ensure that if there were any adverse event that showed up that wasn't previously reported, is now reported to ensure the safety of patients. So what are some of the possible benefits? Well, one of the key benefit in a clinical trial is essentially access to new cancer drug that is not otherwise available through standard of care and is typically not insured by your insurance. You have close monitoring by the specialized care team who would obviously follow you very closely and of course monitor for side effects and assist you with those side effects. And then of course, trying to advance the cancer treatment paradigm. And so when we look at the potential benefits, what about the possible risks? So new treatments always have unknown side effects. This is the reason why we do the study, so we can know about the side effects and how can we mitigate some of those side effects and how can we treat them. The treatment may not work for everybody, and so it may be very selective for certain groups. There's extra visits and tests or time commitment may be needed. The financial burden is real for a lot of patients, depending where the trials are located and how far you have to travel, whether it's once a week, twice, every 2 weeks, or every 3 weeks, etc. So I think it's really important to know your right as a participant. Joining a trial is always a choice. You have the right to participate, but you also have the right to stop the trial at any time during that journey. So it is not a commitment to the end. It's definitely something that you want to be aware of. You will review an informed consent. What are some of the potential risk involved with this trial? What are some of the potential benefit? And then what are some of the commitment involved? And again, you can leave the trial at any time. Ideally, we'd like the patients to stay in the trial for as long as we can so that we can understand what's happening in the trial. But certainly, if things are not working for you, you can leave the trial. Now, is a clinical trial right for you? I think this is a very personal and situational, and it's unique to you. I think it's ideal if you can discuss and ask questions with your care team first, because I think ultimately your healthcare provider will be the first to know, is there a trial that fits your need? And if they don't have a trial that fits your need, then maybe you can branch out to other institutions. And then, of course, some of these resources that we're going to be talking about here. And clinical trials are one option. They are typically not a last resort, and you should view them as a last resort. I like to think of them as at any time in your cancer journey or your health condition journey, you should take an assessment and say, are there trials that would allow me to have access to new drugs at this point in my health journey, rather than saying, oh, I have no other options left. And I like to change your point of view on that. Where can you find cancer clinical trials? So again, emphasizing the importance of talking with your oncologist, cancer care team, because they should be the first to know your past medical history very well, your cancer journey, and so they should be able to recommend certain trials that may be best fit your needs. But if there isn't a trial that is available at your institution where you're getting care, then these are the sort of the resources that we're going to go through. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the ClinicalTrials.gov, and then we'll briefly talk about the MatchTrial app, website, and then MassiveBio as well. So ClinicalTrial.gov is essentially a website, an online database that stores all clinical trial. And you can think of it as a library of clinical research studies. So as an investigator myself, if I have an interventional trial, meaning I am giving a drug or a imaging or some kind of test that I'm basically, trying to ask in a clinical trial, I am required as an investigator to list that study in ClinicalTrials.gov. Now, if it's an observational study, meaning it does not require any interventional drugs or imaging or invasive things, then it may not be listed in ClinicalTrial.gov. And so just be aware. So typically, ClinicalTrial.gov is a requirement for most sponsors and investigators to submit their study information. Now, this information is then kept here, and so you can have access to all the active and past trials for you to see. And so this is obviously available to all patients, healthcare professionals across the whole United States and even the world. And so other countries can list their trials on ClinicalTrial.gov as well. The key things that you have to understand with this is that while, let me go back to the previous slide, maybe. Okay. While it is listed here, the United States, government, in terms of require investigator to list the trials, but they will not review or approve the study itself. That's through a different regulatory process, and that's different than what is here. This is just essentially a list of clinical trials or studies that is submitted. Okay. As of yesterday, when I checked the ClinicalTrial.gov, there are over 500,000 studies listed from 51 states and in more than 200 countries and territories. So you can see that there is a large number of studies listed here, and you can see that 90,000 visitors per day, over 2 million unique visitors every month. So this is a very busy website. It contains very basic information, and so we're going to go through on how to find studies within this website. And this is just to show you the number of registered studies over time, and since 2000 all the way to 2026, you can see that this has exponentially grown since then. And so this is one of the more trusted website, if you will, in terms of trying to find the studies. So we're going to go through a brief number of studies. I'm not going to go through all of them since we're going to try to cut this short a little bit, but essentially just going to go through, say, a breast cancer example, maybe biliary tract cancer example. So let me stop here. And see if I can go to. All right. So within ClinicalTrial.gov, I don't know if you can see the screen very well, but if you were to just type in, at the top here, ClinicalTrials.gov, it would get you to this screen. Okay. Again, the U.S. government does not review or approve the safety and science of all studies listed on this website. That is through a different regulatory process. As I mentioned, this is a way for you to just think of it as, again, a library of studies that you can find. So in here, you can see that you can just type in the conditions. So say if you have stage 4 breast cancer, then you can be as detailed as you want, but some of the topics already listed here. If you want to use other terms, for example, if you're very interested in, say, immunotherapy or other specific treatment options that you've heard about, you could say immunotherapy, which is one of the more novel treatment in the past decade. You could search that, and then the location is where you could potentially say, okay, I live within Minnesota. you could list that, or you could say, you know what, you could say National Institute of National Cancer Institute for the NCI, for example, in Rockville, Maryland. And so you could say, you know, what is the radius that you want, that you're able to travel, and it will list all the trials within this topic, within the location, and within a certain mile radius of that. Okay. And then you could also look at, is it all studies that you want to look at? So this could mean that studies have completed, studies that have been withdrawn, studies that that are not recruiting. Or you just want to look at the recruiting and not yet recruiting, soon to be recruiting. And so this is a more preference that I would probably search. There are more filters here if you want to even narrow that down, which I'm not going to go into that too much detail, because the more narrow you are, the less, you know, studies that's going to show up. But as you can see here, once you submit, at the top here, you can see the card format, or you can see the table format. So sometimes the table format is just nice. It gives you a whole summary. You can see the map, which means the location of where these studies are located. And then the topic, so what kind of studies and who are the sponsor of the study. So let's go back to the table. So looking at, you know, the NCI within 119 miles of the NCI, and looking at stage 4 cancer with immunotherapy, there's really only 2 trials that are recruiting. Now, this is, so you can take a look, you know, click on this, for example, or this, and see more details. What it shows here is the NCT number. This is sort of like the the identity, the ID number of that study. It's very specific to that study. It's typically reported in any abstract or manuscript to show that this is the study title and the number. And then, of course, the conditions and what intervention is being used in that trial, and then who is the sponsor. So sponsor could be the pharmaceutical, or sponsor could be the actual investigator, and then the study type here. So we click into this study. Okay, you can see at the top, again, this is the title of the study. Okay, this is the NCT, again, the identity of that study, the ID number, the sponsor, you know, the provider that's leading that study. And then you can take a look at the study overview. It'll give you a brief summary. And then start date was, you know, July 8 of 2019, and then completion date was anticipated to be June 30th, 2026. And then it goes through a number of things, such as the description, what is arm A, arm B. So you know, certain patients may be randomized to a certain arm. And then, of course, what are their objective? I think the key here for a lot of our patients and family members is, what are the eligibility criteria, and potentially could you participate in it? And so let me see. So here at the bottom here, as you can see me scrolling down, this is the location. It says here the study has 12 locations. And so you can take a look at this and say, okay, which one is the closest to where I live? And then the next thing that, you know, you look at this and you say, okay, this is a study of interest to me. Then you can certainly then reach out to the provider. They do list the email. And you can email the provider and say, you know, you could certainly ask, I have this stage of disease. This is what I've been treated. Am I eligible for this trial? In fact, sometimes, you know, the investigator typically are very aware of the study, so they should see, you know, maybe we need to see you in person, evaluate all the labs to make sure that you meet all of the eligibility criteria, the trial is open, and that's sort of how this all evolved. Okay, and this is where I was talking about in terms of eligibility criteria. And so you want to look through this, and sometimes the language can be a little confusing and complicated to read through. But a lot of times, a lot of these criteria are very similar across the board. So are you able to sign and date an informed consent, right? Are you, basically, you have the ability to read and understand what you are going to get yourself involved with. You need to be 18 years and older, so these is essentially adults, right? You need to have Eastern ECOG performance status of 0-1. This is kind of saying how healthy are you in terms of your physical well-being right now. So are you able to, say, be up and about most of your day, more than 50% of your day, be able to, do your daily activities like cooking, walking around, do a flight of stairs, things like that, that would say, you're strong enough to be able to participate in a study. And then, this criteria here is saying that you have, potentially stage 4 breast cancer, and then you certainly have, additional criteria like ER, PR status, and then of course you need to have measurable disease. That essentially, basically, you have to have a mass or a cancer lesion that is more than 1 centimeter. That's a pretty standard criteria across most of clinical trial. Um, and, and, and because that is one way for us to monitor treatment over time to ensure that with that lesion, does treatment work or not by measuring its size. And then next thing is, do you have adequate organ function, which means that is your heart working fine, right? Is your blood counts, which can be affected by treatment, at a certain threshold that would withstand some of the toxicity that could potentially develop in the trial? Is your liver function, for example, your AST, ALT are in good conditions? Your kidney are in good condition to be able to metabolize the drug, for example. So all of these criteria are meant to ensure the safety of your involvement in the trial, and it would be important for us to make sure that everybody enrolled in the trial have met those criteria. And there are some that are more specific to the trial, right? And so that's sort of where each trial may have distinct eligibility, but across the board, ECOG performance status, measurable disease, adult 18 years old, those are pretty typical across all trials. And then the exclusion criteria are just numerous to ensure that, again, safety is our number one, priority in most of these trials, and they can be very long, very, very confusing and overwhelming for some folks, and that's why you need to meet the primary team. You talk about it and kind of review all of that, and they screen that. You don't have to be the one to screen for it. If you find this study to be interesting, you just contact the team, and they should be able to take it from there for you. Okay, so that's how this, finding ClinicalTrial.gov is operated. Now, here's the thing about this. It provides you the information, but when you go to that institution, they may not have it open. The reason is sometimes a trial goes through some regulatory evaluation, so they may have an interim analysis and they have to close the trial during that time, so it may not be open to you. Sometimes they close early and it's not updated on this website because they had an interim analysis that says, oh, it's not effective, we're going to close this trial, and it may not be updated yet. And so that's part of the challenges of this website. Is not always up to date, but at least it gives you a sort of foundation to say, okay, where are the trials possibly that I could go to and look at. Okay, I think that's an example that I want to show for breast cancer. I live in the biliary world, and so sometimes we look in this website as well. So the next resource I want to look at is matchtrial. Okay, so matchtrial is actually an app / you have a desktop version too, as you can see here. This is developed by a European group, and you can read more about it here under. Let me see. There is a why is matchtrial and what their purpose is. Obviously trying to match a patient to a trial and share the scientific knowledge together. And you can take a look at this website and the care team. Now, I have registered to this website, and so let me see if I can log in and show you what it may look like. The trials that are listed here are mostly in Europe. And so again, this may not be relevant to a lot of folks in the United States if you're focusing only on trials in the United States, but this is just a resource I wanted to highlight because it is available in particular in Spain and France, as well as potentially the UK. So once you log in, again, you just need an email and a password. It's very easy. You can see here that once you log in, it will give you this portal homepage. And then you can just search for a trial. Now, I am in as a physician, but you can search as a patient or as a family member or whatever. And then, you type in what it is that you're looking for. So is it hematology, which is blood-based diseases, or oncology, which is more solid malignancy. And then there's pediatric hematology. So these are kids, whether it's blood-based cancer versus oncology, which is more solid malignancy in kids. And so whichever, topic you're interested in looking for. So I'm in oncology. I deal with GI cancer. So I'm just going to look at the GI, let's see. Oh, here, hepatobiliary pancreas tumor. So that's the diseases that I treat and specialize in. So liver, biliary, or pancreas, right? So I just click on that. And it's very nicely organized. You can see your pancreas, cholangio, or HCC, right? So one of the things I would just highlight here. So say I want to just look at cholangiocarcinoma. They divide this into localized disease, or what we call more advanced disease, metastatic disease. And so a couple of trials come up that I thought was looking pretty good. So the Sapphire ABC, this is led essentially by the UK group that is essentially ongoing. As you can see, that's recruiting. And it is actually quite interesting. And that's one of the studies that I would encourage people, if you have biliary, to consider if you're in the UK, or if you're able to travel. But and again, you go through this, you get to see some of the information, and you can certainly, refer patients, me as a provider, or you could, enroll potentially as a patient if you are interested in it. And there's a lot of options within this because it's a basket or umbrella study, and they're looking at a lot of different information. So it's one of the trials that are ongoing right now in bile duct disease that's really interesting. So if you are interested in, say, I don't want to do hepatobiliary, I want to look at, let's go back to oncology, say I want to look at, let's see, digestive tumors. So this is essentially, your food pipe, your esophagus, your stomach, your colon, basically the food pipe all the way from your mouth all the way to, the end of the anal. So there are lots of studies. And so if you're like, colon cancer is quite common. What are the colon cancer trials that are available? And you can see here, there's quite a few. There's 29 trial listed here. So you probably have to go through each one of them and look at the eligibility criteria. What is the trial assessing? And then bring it to your provider and say, hey, is this is this a trial that would be eligible for me? Is this something I should think about? Again, I want to warn you, this is more of a European website/app. It's very nicely done. I like the interface. It looks really nice, easy to maneuver. But it's something that, say, you want to take a look at, for BRAF, for example, which is a rare tumor, a rare mutation in colorectal cancer, and see, is there a treatment that could potentially be available for you? And this is essentially looking at a BRAF inhibitor with cetuximab, which is available in colorectal cancer. And a neoadjuvant just means you treat it to try to shrink the tumor and then get to surgery. So a neoadjuvant is before surgery in patients with BRAF colorectal cancer or upper rectal cancer. So you have detail and, of course, all the information about that trial. And then they have the inclusion-exclusion criteria here. And again, it is a bit overwhelming sometimes, even myself, when I go through some of this information. So it's always good to look at it and say, I have a BRAF. Talk to your provider, bring this trial to their attention, say, is this something I could be involved in? So that's matchtrial. It's a free app. I like the website interface, which is what we're on right now. I don't have the app. And so if you are interested in the app, I think it probably looks similar on the app, to be honest. And so you can take a look at that through the app or through the website. I have no financial ties to any of these resources, so feel free to take as much as information or as little as you want. The other resource I want to highlight is Massive Bio. This is basically a platform, again, designed by scientists and physicians and such. They essentially collaborate with pharma in trying to bring patients to the trials that are available. So As far as I'm aware, it's free to register to use. Now, I don't know what happens once you are a patient and you say, okay, I want to be involved in a trial. I'm not sure if there's a cost here. I've not actually used Massive Bio, but I think it's a good resource to look through. So if you're a patient, you go through again here, network, matchtrial.health. I'm a physician, so I would sign up. I have not signed up for this. Again, I've not used this program. And then if you're a patient, you can just certainly sign up and see what are the process. I think they have staff that can guide you through the process, and so it's always good to kind of go through this. I would say as a patient, it can be very overwhelming. I would suggest that you have, a friend, a family to help you navigate through this in your own time and see if you can get anywhere with this. These are probably the best resources that I know of that you can look for and try to find a trial. Now, each institution will also list their own trial. So if say, just gonna go here, if I can show you my Google. So if you want to find, say, clinical trials at Mayo Clinic, you will come to this website, and the first thing you'll see is, type in your condition, or so basically your diagnosis. So say you have, breast cancer, for example, and there's pre-populated some of these things already. So if you know that you're, say breast cancer 2 or early onset or something else, you can certainly look that way. You just want to be generalized. You can search, and what will pop up is all type of studies that are available in Mayo Clinic, which isn't helpful because there's 5 pages or more to this. You could filter out the results, whether you're in Florida, for example. You could highlight that, and it limits the number now to 1 in 10 of 60 instead of whatever it was before. You can say open status only, which is what it is right now. Now, not all of these studies are actually interventional, so these could be observational study, meaning they enroll you, they study your history, and it's not a trial where they're applying a treatment or asking you to do an imaging or anything like that invasive. So a lot of these could just be observational studies or therapeutic. So it depends on the study. And so say, this is a study that was open in Scottsdale, Jacksonville, and Rochester, and it's an adjuvant endocrine-based therapy, right? So it's looking at a novel drug, AZD9833, in ER positive or 2 negative early breast cancer. So we'll look through this. And then it lists the PI, and so you could contact them for more information about the study, or you can just call this number for additional information. And what they typically have done in the past, and how it gets to say me, for example, is that this information will then be emailed to me and saying, hey, Dr. Tran, this patient messaged and asked about this trial. Do you think this is possible? And then you kind of look through and have further contact, and then maybe perhaps a visit to see if this is open, is this patient eligible, and could this patient be enrolled? So in most institutions, you'll find some kind of interface like this, and so MD Anderson probably will have one. A lot of the big institutions will have something like this, and each will be different, which is why it's very challenging to find a trial, whether it's in any phase of the treatment paradigm. And the other challenge is every institution will have their own trials, and not all trials are open everywhere at all sites, which is one of the most frustrating thing as an investigator, as a patient, and trying to, you live in, say, Montana, or you live in, in a small area in Florida or somewhere, and the trial is, 5 hours from you or 10 hours from you. It isn't really the right thing because it's so far away, and you just can't commit to something like that. And that's one of the frustration that I have. But having said that, if you're able to travel and then maybe a trial closest to you, it's something to consider and look into. Okay, so with that, I think I'm going to end and open it up for any questions or discussion.
Yeah, for someone new to clinical trials, what's the most important thing to know before considering one, and what questions should you ask your provider?
Yeah. I think one of the first thing to say is, question is, is this a good trial? Sometimes the investigator or your, healthcare provider may be more in the field and know that specific data and say, oh, this looks really promising. You should really consider it. Versus, this trial may not be as interesting or as such. And so that's one of the question I would ask. The second question is, am I eligible? I think that's always a key question to ask because sometimes a trial is a great fit for the patient, but the patient may not be a good fit for the trial. And that's sort of where the connection needs to meet. Because, for example, a patient who's really motivated to be a part of a trial, but say their liver functions are very, for example, high and indicative that, their organ is not as good, they may not tolerate that drug and therefore is not a good fit for that trial. Then it's really not a good fit for that patient, right? Um, and then of course, what is the commitment well with the trial? A patient may be very motivated to be a part of a trial and then realize, oh, they have to come in on day one, day two, day three, day four of that week. And then it becomes, oh my gosh, is this going to be every cycle that they have to commit that time and that travel and that, commitment to be at that institution every single day or every single week or every single once a month? Is it a pill? Is it IV intravenous drug where, they have to go home and take this pill? Could they reliably take the pill? And so that's something that they have to ask themselves and reflect on that and say, okay, am I a reliable person to take the pill and keep a diary of it, say, as a requirement of the trial? Or, I would prefer to be going into the office, get the infusion, and go home and not having to deal with any of that. So all of that has to fit into sort of a personalized approach, and the patient and the provider needs to kind of communicate on that.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. So going off of that, how much control do patients have over their trial? Like if they're feeling any negative side effects, and what are the ways they can navigate that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, part of the trial is that there is very close monitoring. There is a team of nurses, a team of research coordinator, the provider, the investigator themselves are part of that. They have regular visits, and in between, the patient is encouraged to call because they want to be the first to know. They want to be the first. If you have one episode of diarrhea, they want to be the first to know because the earlier they catch it, the earlier they can help mitigate those side effects, give treatments to improve those side effects, and then of course prevent it from escalating. Right, the worst thing that we all want is that the patient go into the hospital because of a severe side effects, and so we want to know it firsthand and early on. And so the patient is empowered to call and to let the team aware sooner rather than later.
And so after they go through the process of clinical trials, what happens after it ends? How do they get the results, or how can they figure out if the clinical trial was successful?
Yeah. So during the trial, you get treatment, you get assessment just as part of standard of care. You get imaging every 2 months or however the way the protocol is written, sometimes 6 weeks or 8 weeks. You get scans to see, okay, did the treatment work? If the treatment didn't work, obviously the patient in front of us is the most important person. And we say, okay, if treatment doesn't work, we would take you off trial, right? There isn't really a protocol that would allow you to continue on the trial if it's not working for the patient. So if it's working, we would know that, and the patient continues for as long as it's benefiting the patient and the patient's tolerating that treatment. If it's not working, we would take that patient off, and then the patient will then continue with the next treatment with their care team. In terms of say, what if a patient is randomized to a arm where they don't know what they got? Once the study is completed and is reported out, the blinding can be open, meaning you can then find out which arm you were in. But regardless of that status, the assessment during treatment is always going to be important, right? Because it's going to tell the patient whether or not it's working for them or not. And that's always the indicative, the indicator where the patient stay on the trial or not. And that is the utmost important thing for us is to know that whether or not the patient's actually benefiting from the trial. But whether you get which arm or which treatment, whether it's blinded, the physician's blinded, the patient's blinded, that information could come out later on, but shouldn't impact the care of the patient.
I see one question in the chat. Can patients be involved in more than one study at the same time?
Uh, Good question. No. And the reason is, well, let me rephrase that. So it depends on what studies you're talking about. So say, a patient is interested in an observational study and they say, oh, that observational study is asking for a one-time blood draw or a survey to be completed, right? They could participate in that as it has no effect on, say, their involvement in a therapeutic interventional clinical trial where they're being giving a drug to test how well it works, the side effects, and all of that. So yes, they could technically be on two separate studies as long as the observational study, for example, is not affecting any of the outcome or any of the question that's being asked in the interventional clinical trial. But the hard answer is if you're involved in, can you be involved in two clinical trials at the same time? That is a no, because you don't want one to be, to affect the other, right? And so at the end of the day, that's not really ideal for us to understand what's going on with the treatment, with the patient's outcome. So the answer there is depends. It depends on what study you're looking at.
That makes sense. I wanted to open it up to see if anyone has any questions. Feel free to either put it in the chat or unmute yourself.
I do have two clinical trials where I've been able to share patients because in rare diseases you don't have a lot of patients, and so sometimes you have to see how, if the patients are willing, you can collect data on two separate trials, which we have been able to do. Collecting samples before starting either, and then again delaying the therapy in one until the first one has collected their data. So we have been able to manipulate that, but it is challenging, and patients have to really be willing.
Yeah, I am not aware of that you could be involved in two clinical trials at the same time, but I guess it depends on the
There
timing.
is, yeah,
Yeah,
but you talked about observational studies, and
right,
in this case, it was collecting stool samples,
right.
and we can do that before therapy starts. And in one we have at Stanford, we have a what's called a CAP scan, that is a device that is an ingestible device that then collects specimens from the intestinal tract. So what we did is we did that before we started the therapy at Yale, and then started the therapy and collected stool samples before each, then did the CAP scan, and then sent the patient back over to Yale to get the stool sample and start the therapy. So, yeah, we were able to do that, but it's really a challenge. And I worked with designing a trial for Mayo Clinic, and our biggest problem, this was the oral vancomycin trial. I don't know if you heard about it, but it was challenged because of how unpatient friendly it was made. And
I can see why.
having
Right.
the length of the trial for 18 months, and then on top of it having a 50% placebo, and then using a liquid therapy that Mayo decided to make it QID dosing. So patients were just like, yeah, we're not doing it. And so it was a real challenge. And then offering, so when you add placebos to a trial, it really it changes the whole dynamics. You have to really think of the patients when designing these trials.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you. Thank you for that comment. I think one of the statistics about trial is that 80% has delay or not able to complete enrollment, which is part of that is how patient friendly is the protocol, right? And if
Right.
you have a very difficult protocol, I would agree with you that, well, as a patient, as much as you want to add to the science and the advancement and the hope, well, if it's so much burden on them, I can see why it would fail from the first step.
And then what you end up getting are, I mean, a lot of these, it's a tragedy because many therapies that could work are not trialed on earlier stage patients who are more likely to be the younger patients who have families who might have to travel. They're not old white folks who live right near a Mayo Clinic. I mean,
Right.
you know, that's how it ends up, and that's what we ended up seeing, was that the younger patients, they just can't, you know, they can't meet those criteria. And so we've really got to think through also uh, using existing data on a particular disease, and not requiring a placebo for a long period of time, or using that patient's own data as the placebo. And so you enroll the patient, use that data for 3 months or 4 months, and then put them into a clinical trial.
I
So,
think you raise a good point that, trials could be done better in their design. And I think involving patient advocacy early on is a great way of ensuring that the patient's voices are heard in the initial phase of the design, and easier and friendlier. Um, I think that's a lot more popular nowadays in terms of a lot of the foundations and grants and such are incorporating that part into any funding mechanism.
well, and especially for rare diseases, I mean, natural history data is available, and I understand the gold standard, but the gold standard doesn't work for when you have rare diseases that are where patients are scattered around the country. It's just too expensive to
Yeah,
have multiple sites, or if you can't do remote access. We're finding that with a simple observational trial at Yale, and we had 3 sites. We thought surely we'll collect 20 patients. No. And, you know, even a 2-week delay in getting patients to a medication is, parents will not let their children do that. You know, they panic. And so how do you move forward clinical research, especially in pediatric patients? Because that is one of the more challenging areas. At least adults understand. Parents are not in that frame of mind.
absolutely. Yeah. I have to say there's a lot of challenges with clinical trials, and it goes from from the beginning A to Z, and especially for rare diseases. So you're bringing up great points. All right. Any other questions or comments?
If there's no other questions or comments, thank you so much, Dr. Tran, for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all for joining, and I hope that you get something out of it, and hopefully some of these
I
resources.
did. I've saved your sites and found it very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you.